Hello, it's Paul Rivoche. I'm a veteran artist in comics and animation. And so this is a video for my series called The Drawover. And what I do in this series is artists have submitted examples of their work and requested a critique. So I'm going to do that here. There's a piece of work from a woman who goes by the name of Creative Faye on X and elsewhere. So I'm going to do what's known as a drawover or critique. And before I get into that, I'll show the art in a second. I chose one piece of art from her Instagram. The idea is to give examples of the process of doing a critique. So then people might ask, well, why do a critique at all? Well, the idea is for improvement. So unless you nail your drawing in the first step, the first take, which is rare, you want to go through a series of, like a cycle, product improvement cycle. You know, if you're making any kind of product, whether it's a car or a design for something, you know, a consumer product of any kind, they always go through cycles and they don't just arrive at the first thing and put it out. So oftentimes when you're creating something, particularly if you're doing commercial work or work that has a function rather than randomly doodling, you're going to go through a series of steps. And so what I'm trying to show here is a process of critique that could either come from outside, like in this case, it's coming from me to someone else, but also you're going to want to be able to do this for yourself, for your own art. It's your interior monologue. And, you know, you do that because you're trying to find a series of improvements. Drawing's all about making decisions. And, you know, do I go this way, that way to make this element larger or smaller? What do I include? What do I leave out? So the process of that thinking is what's going to result in your actions that you're going to put on your paper. And then, of course, once you do your first sketch or step, you're going to revise it. You know, the secret to good drawing is redrawing, just like they say with writing. The secret of writing is rewriting. So that's what I'm trying to encourage in people is you got to examine your workflow. Whether we like it or not, we all have a workflow. And it's like a training. It's like the series of steps that you become used to doing, sometimes without being aware of it, of how you create your drawing. So what you have to try and do is make that a little bit more aware and then tinker with it and hopefully try and improve that process. If you improve the process of the steps that you use to make your drawing, your different methods, you're going to improve the end result. And the stages on that road to that end result are learning how to do critiques. So again, I'm demonstrating here how to do this with somebody else, somebody else's work. But ultimately, the goal is to be able to do it yourself because you're not always guaranteed to have somebody there right with you that you can bring on from off stage. Here's my art expert, going to give me critiques, give me answers. You know, it might be 2 a.m, you've got a deadline or you're working on your art or whatever, and you realize it's not what you want it to be. You've got to figure out how to improve it. And the whole idea is which way is up and which way is down. Because sometimes we make changes and then the thing gets worse. Like you get up the next day or you look at it a couple of days later and go, oh, that's even worse. So you don't want that. You want it to be objectively improving. And this could get into all kinds of side tangents, but that's the basic idea of why you critique. You can't avoid it. And particularly if you're a commercial artist working professionally, you're going to have to get used to that anyway. Any pro will tell you that. You know, you do your work, you submit it to the client. They're paying money. The work has a function, which is, you know, to sell a comic book, or it might be, I've worked extensively in animation like Batman Beyond back years ago, and more recently, like on the feature film RobotDreams. So, for example, in that field, I'm doing background drawings, or it might be designs for other things. It has to have a function in the movie. It's part of a story. It's creating a setting. So it's a functional item. And again, you're going to get input from other people who are basically critiquing it. They're telling you this isn't working and you got to change it. So it's all about a series of steps. And, you know, in professional work, sometimes people will be professional. Other times they won't be so nice about it. So that gets into another aspect of this, is that you have to kind of remove your ego And you have to be, in a little way, cold to your work. Because, in fact, that's what other people are going to do. Sometimes they're nice and they tiptoe around. Other times they're brutal and mean. You see this in the internet wars. But long story short, no matter what way the stuff arrives, the information has to be dealt with, and you either accept it or reject it. Like if you think it's an objective improvement, then you incorporate that into the work. So again, being a professional, you have to just learn to kind of turn your emotions off. But what you realize is you can use that same process with yourself. In other words, you create freely, you just explore, you're enthusiastic about a drawing. You don't have to be in full analytical mode and tear it down or something. But you do want to do that. And then later, unless you feel like it's completely perfect and glorious the way it is, if you feel like that nagging feeling, oh, I need to improve this or change it, that's when you go into a more analytical mode and you kind of figure out, well, let's move this around, change this or that. Again, like a client would when you submit work to them. So I'm going to switch my mode here and show the drawing that Faye has submitted. Well, she didn't submit this one. I chose it off her Instagram, but it's really here I'm going to be talking about drawing, and I'm not really going to be talking about the concept of it. That's a whole nother thing. What I've done here is put it into Photoshop, and I put a white layer over it at about 88%, just to gray it out. And then I'm going to draw on top with my brush, and I'm going to talk about different things as they occur to me. But when I look at this, really what it is, it's not altogether bad. I'm even trying to avoid using good and bad. But it has a lot of hallmarks typical of, you could say, a more beginner approach. It kind of is awkward. Like, one thing I'll start with is there's a tendency to focus on the rendering. So this has been all rendered up and inked, but the inking itself looks awkward. And I think I said this earlier, but I'm going to repeat it. The point of my comments here is not to be brutal or mean. There's no like thrill I get from saying that. But the fact is that if you want to improve, you got to just face things. And you can do that privately yourself, or other people will do it, particularly if you put work out there. So if you learn to do it yourself, objectively, and not in a self-hating way, then you're kind of bulletproof. You're immune to things that other people say. You can already know it. Anyway, moving on. I think the rendering is kind of awkward because there isn't a light source that's defined. Like, there's a general light source from above. If you look here, there's shadow underneath the helmet, and there's some shadow underneath here, the arms, and there's kind of a cast shadow on the ground here. I think you can see my cursor in the screen, but then there's very thick lines on some of the top forms. And what you want to typically do is, if there's a light source from above, you want to have thinner lines on top and thicker underneath, and then you're going to have transition here. My brush is doing something I don't want it to do, so who knows? Flow, let's increase flow. These are real-time problems in video recording. That fixed it. Okay, I'm going to remove that bit of drawing. Now, going back to, I'm going to also increase my opacity here quickly, so bear with me. I didn't want a 100% black line. I like to work in a rougher line. Now, here's a question. When you do a drawing or composition and it's a realistic drawing, what is the first line that you should be thinking of, in my opinion? At least this is what I do. And of course, I'll give you a moment, but it's a trick question because the first line is usually an invisible line that may or may not show up in the final drawing. It's the horizon line. So the horizon line is the eye level that you're at with your perspective. So here, the thing is that there's no sense of perspective in this drawing. Like, I mean, there's a little bit that's kind of intuitive because you feel like this character, the main character here, is down below, and you know, there's looking up at this stairway. So you're sort of eye level down with this character. Unfortunately, up here, you see here, you can still see the tops of these stairs. So that means that our eye level is up here somewhere, if you can see the top of those stairs. But at the same time, you feel like eye level is probably down here somewhere. And if that's the case, then any stair above the top plane of any stair above this line is going to be invisible. You're not going to be able to see it. So let's work with that. And I'm just clearing that. Let's work with that. Let's say that that's our eye level. That's where our camera, the height above the floor is. Well, then the next thing is figuring out left to right where your vanishing point is. And here it looks like it's basically somewhere like here to me. And it could even be further over to the left here. But let's say it's there. That means that, say there's a line on the floor here. It's going to be here. Oops. That's not good. All right. It's going to be there. So then you're going to get your other lines kind of coming in, going towards that vanishing point. And I'm going to use my ruler here quick to make it quicker. It's going to be like that. Now, I haven't even dealt with the character, but I'll get to him in a second. I'm just sort of building the physical 3D space of this room. Now, the ceiling up here looks way too high. It would have to be like some kind of giant room. But and this line here has a compositional element. I don't like it there. It's taking you randomly somewhere, I don't know, in front of this helmet. You'd probably want it either far over here, or you want it coming down to take your eye down towards that helmet. And I'll erase a bit of that. Maybe because we're kind of low angle, you'd probably have a line coming like that, going somewhat towards that vanishing point. Although some of that can be somewhat cheated in some cases for compositional purposes. But all in all, what you want is enough lines in the drawing to create that sense of illusion. And one of the problems here in the drawing is that there's no, there's no ground level lines, like indications from a wood floor or something like that, bottom of this banister, which you might do something like this. And what you want to do is construct this honestly. So in real space, you want to establish, you could do it on a layer, the base of this banister. In other words, you want to construct it in real life. So you might say behind this character, the staircase ends there. You don't even have to draw it perfectly right now. I'm just thinking about construction. The banister's there, and you have to worry about proportion with something like this. The staircase is going up like this. It's actually going to go to a vanishing point that connects up there with on this line. And so that gives you the idea of where to draw other lines that are parallel, like the other lines of the stairs, although that's a bit narrow. What you do in this stage of a drawing like this is you work out this stuff in a schematic way. Oops. It doesn't really have to be perfect, but what you want to do is get the basic feeling of perspective. You're always juggling it, though, against compositional needs. Like here, the compositional needs might simply be, I need that doorway big enough to show this person. So, and again, this isn't looking right to me because the banister, the railings would be too short. So I'm going to go up here, see how this works. Well, that's not really working because let's undo. These are the problems you struggle with. You'd probably have to move this in a bit. because you want a sense of space. You don't want that doorway super wide. You want it big enough to feature the character. I'm erasing these lines here. But you want a feeling of convergence, that these are getting narrower, going towards that vanishing point. And then you want a sense of spacing here. So you want these tapering back. Those would be like the center points of the bars of the railing. And then probably for reality, you'd want, depending on your design, you'd probably want a handrail on the other side. And then you've got the door, which if the door is pretty much flat against the wall, it's going to be going down to this vanishing point, the bottom edge of it. And you want to think here about, this is a center line here. That's the center line of an oval described by the door as it swings, although it doesn't swing in a full 360-degree circle. But what that does is, if you can see this on my drawing, it gives you a sense of the foreshortening of the door. I'm doing this rather quickly, but I'm trying to give a sense of the workflow, the way you think about this. I'm erasing back this circle because I don't want it bugging me. So you'd have the door there probably bumping against this handrail. You might show how the handrail's attached. It's going to give a sense of reality. And I'm not going to go through a complete thing here, but that gives you an idea of the main point being, you want to construct a three-dimensional volume. If you're drawing three-dimensionally, construct a three-dimensional volume that's convincing, and build in enough indicators of perspective, like floor lines like I'm adding here. It could be like wooden floor, or you could have a carpet here. What you're trying to do cleverly is put in indicator lines that will guide the sense of perspective. Now, there is an element here in the foreground. I guess it's like a coffee table. I can't really tell, which is really a commentary I have about some of the elements of this drawing. Like if you look back here, this is giving me that no drawing sign because I'm in a different layer. So don't get perturbed. If you look here, you don't know what this is. Like, is that a desk? I'm not sure. It looks like a desk. But that gets into design. Like, you want to create a sense of reality. So you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision about the vanishing point, the eye line. You have to make a decision what kind of basement this is. I'm not saying you have to populate it with a million things. Like if this is meant to be a gag cartoon, you might not want that much. And I don't know what this was designed as, if it was a gag cartoon or something. I didn't get into that level. I'm just treating it strictly as a drawing and using it as a springboard to talk about design. But if you do say to yourself, okay, it's an environment and I want a sense of reality, you want to try to make it coherent. So in other words, is it a basement rec room? Is it a dumping ground for like boxes and storage? You know, is it some other kind of usage in the basement? It's clearly in a basement. You want to decide that and add some elements. So it's like if it's a basement office, you could and say it's, I think you can have a picture. You know, you can have other things here helping with the perspective. You could have, this could have been like a diploma mounted on the wall, you know. You could have other elements to give it a bit more sense. Like if this is a home office in the basement and there's a desk here, you'd have to scale this to get the right sense of height for the proportions, which is a bit of another challenge that I'm not going to go into right now. It's a bit beyond the scope of this. I'm really trying to describe here in this video the workflow in your mind as you critique and build something up. But if this is a basement, you can have other elements. You can have a lamp on the desk maybe. I almost put one here vertically, but that might conflict with this coffee table in the foreground, see? So what I'm going to do instead is just have this, if this is a coffee table and we're a little bit underneath it, you can have it here. You don't want that touching. I think I've got it a little too high. You want to figure out where it contacts the ground, and then you're going towards this vanishing point. You want to show enough of it that people can figure out what it is. Like here's the other leg. You could have the far leg, you could have some magazines here or books, you know. And so that might give people the sense of what it is. You could have maybe something recognizable, like a coffee mug here. These are not meant as absolute requirements. I'm not saying this is the only way to sort of improve this drawing. I'm trying to give you a sense of how to think about what you put in it or what you exclude. You're telling a story. You're trying to create a believable three-dimensional scene and create a sense of depth. So that gives you a sense of what I'm talking about with perspective and design. Now I'm going to create another layer here in my little Photoshop file, and I'm going to talk about drawing. I'm going to make it 80%, I think. Let's make it 60. I've got my Photoshop reminders bugging me. 65. Okay. Now, what I'm going to talk about here is quickly about composition, and then I'm going to work on some figure stuff. So for composition, what you have here is a lot of no-nos. They're called tangents. Like if I zoom in this here, see how these lines come together here, this, 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 this. They're all touching, and it's all flat. So it's flat because you can't tell what overlaps in front of what. What you want to be doing more is, say this neck here. You've got the neck, you've got the shoulder line, you've got the helmet. You want to keep them clear of each other. And then you've got this strap. So the strap could be like, if it's further back, it could be like that, but it's clearly in front of the other one. Or it could be the other way, like say it's further inside, it's here. You know, it might connect to something or whatever. The idea is, and then you've got this collar here. You don't want that collar, let me go back in my history here. You don't want that collar just coming straight out like this. Have it either below or above. What you're trying to do is every place, make the overlaps clear in depth. And this collar, again, you don't want it touching the same spot as the end of this helmet. Those are called tangents. It's a real no-no in three-dimensional drawing. It's because it confuses people about the depth. You can't see what's overlapping what. And on a two-dimensional piece of paper, all they have to go on, their eyes and mind, is what's overlapping what, and some other clues. But that's a big one, what overlaps what. And we don't realize it, but that's what we look for when we scan a drawing. And it also makes for a boring silhouette when everything's at a point. See, when you get this silhouette coming around like this, it makes it more interesting than a pinchy point. See how this is a pinchy point there? It's like, ouch, it's painful. And let's do a quick erase here. There's a lot of other places where this is happening in this drawing. Like there, see how this coffee table is hitting the desk? And these are the kinds of things that, when I say that drawing is thinking, that has many different sort of interpretations or uses. I was saying to a friend that Alex Toth has had this saying, and I don't know if it was his or from someone else, think more, draw less. And I said to the friend that the older I get, the more I understand how much is packed into one simple memory phrase like that. Because it could mean thinking about your drawing before you do it. It could mean thinking about your drawing after you've done it, trying to figure out what to change. It could be thinking about your drawing while you're drawing and remembering to employ things like this, which is definitely something I do as I'm drawing. I've got a little program running in the back of my head. I guess it's like the nagging voice going, don't overlap that line there. Like, and if you do, and you notice it, change it, get yourself to change it. And the same thing happens in other places in this drawing. You see over here, now this isn't two lines hitting, but you've got the banister going off the edge of the page right there. It's very awkward. Oops, darn. I've got a new Photoshop program that I just, I was using the old one, and some of the commands are different. So I just moved the entire layer. Anyway, see how in lots of places here, you've got things cropped awkwardly and touching, or this is almost touching. you want to not be doing that. Like you want your figure either well inside or going easily outside the page. I'm gonna erase this again. Let's just delete the layer and make a new one. And I'm going to make it 70%. And what I'm going to do is make the white mask a little whiter, 93%. Okay, I'm going to talk about the drawing a little bit, and then I'll probably wrap this up. The figure drawing's okay. I don't know if it's based on a photo or something, but there's lots of small things that could do with improvement. Okay, so one thing is to think about silhouette. See how here the hose is stuck into the arm. I'm starting almost randomly here because there's a lot of different things I could say about this, but you don't want to do that because it just doesn't make for a good silhouette. A silhouette is if you went around this whole thing and then you fill it in. I guess it's kind of like this. If I can do it. Let me get my magic wand to cooperate. See that? I mean, that's okay. You can kind of tell what is going on, but you can improve it a lot because the hose isn't showing down here. See down here, it's not showing. So you want to put the hose in the silhouette. You probably want to make it clear of the helmet. Like I said about the foot, you don't want the foot going out. And you're probably wondering here, what happened to the other foot? There's no other foot. The hand doesn't feel like it's contacting the ground properly. And here, you don't really have extension on the hose to see that it's some kind of vacuum cleaner nozzle. So that sort of gives you the idea of silhouetting. When you make a silhouette, you should always, like when you make a drawing, you should always be thinking about the silhouette, like if I did that to it, and you can do this on your own drawings if you're working digitally, fill it in or put a masking layer behind it, which you might do if you're making a coloring file for computer. Fill that in black or just look at the silhouette, whatever way you want to do, and say, if I reduce that down tiny, or if I just show that to someone, particularly tiny, can they tell what it is right away? Does it have readability? Because if it doesn't, you've got problems. So here, let me see what I can say that's helpful to actually kind of spruce this up a bit. The guy's vacuuming, he's got some kind of helmet, and there's some kind of gag about, what's the gag here? Doesn't really matter, but I'm curious. Honey, don't forget to vacuum under the coffee table. And I don't really understand completely, but I guess he's got a helmet. That's the canister. Is he a warrior? I don't know. He's got belt pouches. Let's just talk about it as a drawing, though. I'm going to think about, oops, I've got the wrong tool. All right. What I want to see is more flow. I'm not even dealing with the whole thing of, maybe I will make a bigger canvas now. Yeah, I could, there we go. I could have moved it over and I would do that. But let's just make it quicker because I'm doing a video by extending the canvas. Then I can show you what I'm talking about with my drawing, like just working on the figure. Okay, so you want to probably think in general terms. And I'm approaching this now just as a kind of gestural thing, not so much as a construction, although I may add some of that. But if he's crouching on the ground, you're going to want more sense of volume. I guess that is structure. This would be like the figure without any clothes, and you want a sense of the hips, the waist here. I'm doing it in a very general way. But what you want is that it's done like with a sense of, okay, there's the ankles. This ankle would be somewhere back here. And then you want a sense of contact with the ground, like here's the shoulders. Contact with the ground will come in a second. My thoughts are overlapping each other. But here, see how the arm here has to be probably fairly straight because you want it actually touching the ground with a contact point. And you've got a hand. And his hand's maybe a little big. You might want to show a bit of the thumb. Erase a bit of this to make it clear while I'm working on it. You might need to be leaning over a little more. You want a sense of flow to the figure, like this is flowing through. And then he's reaching. Let's move this over. He's reaching here. That's not right. Depends on how muscular he is, if he's a superhero type of character, but I'm just thinking about the basic anatomy here. What you want to do is probably a drawing like this underneath a form drawing. What it would get into is, like I said, how muscular this character is. I'm trying to think here about some of the anatomical landmarks. Now here we get into something trickier, which is holding this hose. As I'm drawing this, you can't see because I haven't put myself full screen, but I'm actually just, I've got a ruler I'm working with and I'm holding it as if it was a hose and looking the way my fingers go. You can always do this, you know. Use yourself for reference, take an iPhone photo and study it. Usually not trace it, although sometimes. But usually you have to modify if you do that because the lens will introduce certain distortions. But here I'm just thinking about this structurally, you know, like I'm not even drawing this hose convincingly, the nozzle, because it might have some kind of other thing on it, but say like that for now. And all right, so we got that. Now let's do a little bit of structure on the neck. And I'm not drawing this guy's head, although I might just well, let's just do a quick indication. See about the sizing. He could have his head up, I guess, and be looking down with his eyes. Is he pouty face? Probably. All right, so he's there, and then what I'm going to do is, yeah, I'll build on top of this. So let's reduce this down to 25%, and I'll make a new layer, and I'll do the rest on top of that. Now, this is not meant to be fine linking, but I'm going to give you a sense that you have this construction drawing. You can build on top of it. Whoops. Because of the perspective, because we're below, these should sort of converge a little bit. And here, my hand wobbled. You see here, you've got this. You got a sense of a center line. This is still doing construction. You're thinking this way, though, when you're drawing. I guess it's like this is structure drawing number 2. But when you're drawing, part of your workflow should be you're always thinking transparently, like everything's made of glass. That's called working through. Sorry, drawing through. And you think of things like center lines. This is the center line of this cylinder, but it's not the center line of the helmet. The center line of the front of the helmet might be like here somewhere. So here I'm thinking about, does this line up convincingly with, I'm just looking at the original drawing. Does this line up convincingly being the two sides of the helmet? I'm just taking a peek here at some of the other elements. See here, for example, I would think about centering this nicely, using that center line. And then the hose, as I said earlier, you'd want it to be clear enough of the figure to make an interesting silhouette. I made it a little thinner, which doesn't matter, but anyway, that's okay, because this here would be a little closer than back here. So you're thinking that inner voice is saying this over here would be a little bit thinner here, and it would be a little thicker here if you measured it. See, because it's closer. That I'd probably move, because it could be touching your shoulder. In which case when you render it, you would be putting shadows like that to show that it's on his shoulder, because that's showing contact. See here how the shadow gets narrower, and it's like if something is getting closer, right? You're fading it out. Say you have a piece of paper, just a random example, but like the way you render shadows can show spacing. See here, there's the reverse case, what I'm demonstrating. Look at Joe Kubert, he knows all about this. Like, look at Joe Kubert classic covers. They use this kind of lighting. It's form indication and distance space indication lighting. It's not always strictly literal. I copied it from a photograph lighting. It's suggestive lighting. It's giving the viewer information about space and contact. So here I know the contact point is there. I've decided that right there in that shoulder. And that's why I've done that. Anyway, moving on. I may or may not do all of this, but the idea is probably getting across to you that if you have a solid construction to your drawing, there's some kind of a jacket. You have a solid construction to your drawing, you can build on top of it. It's exactly like building a house, not only to a solid construction to the entire form, like I showed earlier with the perspective, but a solid construction of the bodies and the figures. And you'll find that most professionals do this. I mean, probably if you get good, you can learn to construct these things on the fly out of your head and then adjust them afterwards. There's various different workflows, but it's never harmful to learn to draw this way. And that's, again, a subject of a whole nother thing. Like, different people draw different ways. You can find your own personal workflow. There's straight ahead drawing, where you're just doing final lines. There's drawings using just sheer shapes. And then there's this kind of drawing where you're using construction and center lines. You're always thinking in terms of, volumes like this and center lines. It's kind of like what a computer would do, but it's the way that it was done before computers came along. So people can do that too. I'm looking back at the costume. Oh, there's gloves. Okay, so there's these gloves. So then, for example, if I was putting in these gloves, here I'd be thinking about, is the glove going back or forward? Because sometimes you don't necessarily want it equal, but here it's probably going back a bit. The arm's coming forward. So the arm is touching here, resting against the glove inner sleeve, and the back maybe has a bit of play, and it's tapering down there. And you might show a seam line or something that a real glove might show compression here. What kind of outfit do we have on? It looks fairly tight the way it's drawn. So when you have tighter clothing, you're going to have narrower wrinkles. Like if you have thicker, looser clothing, you're going to have, like, say, an arms bending. You're going to have much bigger wrinkles. But in something like this, you look at like athletic clothing, the wrinkles are tighter and smaller, more narrowly spaced, because there's less loose volume in the clothing. Let's look at what else we have here. Another element is this belt. So then we're going to think about the belt coming around. We're going to think of building it. So the belt might swing down a bit and go around here. But if you draw transparently, you can build up an honest drawing. Like here, I've moved this pouch up a bit because his leg's there. And then this one's maybe going this way a bit. If they continue around, you're going to have them turning. I don't know if you'd clip one right around the back. It's a bit awkward, but let's say you did. Batman does it all the time. You have boots. I don't know if this guy's got boots, but you get the point, right? You're going to be thinking about the wrinkles. You're going to be thinking about the way they gather here from the knee. They pull from the contact points. There may be indications of slight musculature. And you're always adjusting. Another thing you can do that I do constantly is flip canvas. So you want an instant view reverse of what you're doing. And it's like looking at a new drawing. So you can often spot mistakes because it's like someone showing you a new drawing. So here I'm really looking carefully, like what could I do that with that first impression that would improve it? And probably here I see that maybe this leg could be a little bigger. The body looks a little bit big in relation to the leg. So probably I would grab that with Photoshop and shrink this down a little bit. But again, I'm not going to do that right now, but I'm not going to get too fussy with this. And actually what I see here is, depending on what I established in my perspective, yeah, this leg, this one looks okay. Oops. For the boots and stuff, whatever that is. Although he needs, if it's boots, he'd need some heels and soles and stuff. But this foot looks a bit odd. Maybe we should move it in here and show it a little better. You might even see a bit of indication there coming into the silhouette. And again, I'm always thinking about silhouette. It's one of the #1 things to improve your drawings is check the silhouettes. Does this guy have, oh, he has glove over his. So here, for example, the change, I'm going to get rid of this, it's annoying me. The change in the junction here with the glove, I'm putting that in the silhouette. Unless it was an absolutely tight glove, right? Like it was like some kind of like rubber glove that was completely flush with his arm, then you wouldn't put it in the silhouette. But here, if it's like a leather glove of some kind, you can show it because it makes the journey around the silhouette more interesting. What's on his back there? Nothing really. So I feel like this needs a little more, like the musculature there. And I'm going to flip it back around. You can even do stuff upside down, like the old 180 degrees thing. That can even show you things undo. So one last thing, and I think I'm going to wrap up, is this was reasonably well done, I would say, in the original, is the feeling of the rotation of these lines and the spacing. See how here they're like this. By the time they're up here, they would be like that. And they're arcing around. And they're getting closer together because they're getting further away. They're also getting closer together not only because they're getting further away, but they're warping around here. So these are tougher things to do, but if you practice, oops, I messed up the spacing myself there. It's a little bit too funky, but the idea is that for a sense of volume, you want to follow that pattern as you're coming around. So those are some of the concepts to work with. Think three-dimensionally. Always be drawing transparently. If you're doing digital work, use the power of layers, and use the power of digital to alter sizes, undo things, draw in sequential layers. Before that, before digital, artists, and then we still do this, we use different colored pencils, like color-based pencils, and you'll often see people doing like 3 or 4 layers, like light blue, and then sometimes red, and then sometimes a pencil drawing with graphite, lead and black lead, and then finally an inking. But it really depends on the person. But that's the same idea, which is iterating different stages of a drawing. And I'm going to come back here. I come back and say goodbye. Thank you for watching the video. Try and incorporate some of those concepts into the drawing. And I guess the last thing I'll say is to Creative Faye, who submitted her drawing, or she said I could take one of her drawings and do this talk over. You know, the real thing with this is, I feel strongly that I have to repeat this. The real thing is not to be mean or brutal about critiques, even to yourself. I mean, we see these employed on the internet as weapons of war. And, you know, they say that if you want an honest critique, ask your worst enemy. So sometimes people will be saying truth. And that, to me, unfortunately, it gets all muddled up because you have this snarling mass of dogs and cats fighting, and it's like the big jumble of fur flying everywhere. If you're on your personal journey as an artist and you want to improve, you've got to thread your way through that and try not to get caught up in that, because what you want is objectivity. You want to be as objective as you can. Like if you made the darn head too big in the drawing, you made the head too big. There's no way around it. You got to fix it. You got to admit it. Other people will see it. And some of them are less obvious or clear cut than that. Okay. So sometimes you have things in the category of creative choices. You use green. Someone else says, oh, why don't you use red or blue? That might be taste, you know, or particular interest. So some of those kinds of things you can't say are objective and clear cut. But in other things, for example, form and elements of composition, like what I was talking about tangents, about drawing things touching like that, those are less subjective. They're more objective. And I think the idea is to develop a sense of that for yourself. And you want to remove the emotion, because after all, sooner or later, you either fix the drawing and you learn how to improve your work step by step, either one single piece of work or your work overall through the years. You either learn to do that or you don't. And the only way to do that is by honesty and being objective as you can and sort of admitting it. And to do that, to be honest, what you have to try your best to do, which can be difficult for artists or sensitive types, you have to try and remove the emotion. And if you think about it, it's kind of funny. People get so attached to their drawings. I know I have in the past. Everybody does. And it really, then you step back later and think about it. What is it really? It didn't even exist 10 minutes ago. You draw something, or an hour or two. And of course, the more time you invest, the more you get attached to it. Chuck Jones, the famous animator, you know, who worked on Bugs Bunny and other projects, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, he did that one. He said you have to learn to throw out your baby. And that's really referring, I believe, to a similar thing, which is we get super attached to it. It becomes like your baby. It's like, oh, I did this beautiful thing. Look at this. I want to show it to everybody. But then often every artist working knows this. You come to some point where you go, the baby, it doesn't fit the picture. This beautiful thing I did, this bit of brush rendering or this element I threw in. And then I got to throw out the baby. So it's not meant literally, of course, but I got to erase that. And sometimes it can be very difficult to do. What it all goes to is illustrating the sense of attachment that we feel towards our drawings. And if you learn to be dual mode, so you can be like, you know, by ambidextrous, you know, you're not using just one hand, it's like two, right? So if you're in that sense, you can switch your modes. You know, 1 minute you're being very emotional and very attached and into the emotionality of your drawing. You're enthusiastic about it. You want to put it on paper or on the screen. And then later you look at it kind of objectively, like, as I said, the way your worst enemy would. And you go, oh, okay, that's really just not working. And you just erase it, or if it's a layer, you remove it. If you kind of learn to do that, remembering that it didn't exist yesterday, then you're much more freed up, you know. And so learning to draw is learning to redraw. It's learning not to be attached to all this stuff so much. Of course, it's easier said than done. And it's harder too when you've got something where a lot is riding on it, like pressure. So if you're a professional and you have to perform and deliver something, you got a lot of pressure. But you'll notice with most professionals is they are less attached. they're used to redoing stuff and reworking stuff. The way I've said it to myself often is, and I learned this from watching animators, they would go through so many drawings and they'd be flipping them. Before using computers, they'd have a stack of drawings between their fingers like this, and they'd flip them to make them animate. And it's the coolest thing. And sometimes they'd take one out and crumple it up in a ball and toss it. And I'd say, wow, they're just not attached to their drawing. They're not being all precious. I had come up more through the sort of personal illustration thing, like very fussy paintings and things. And I'm so attached to this. This is like my beautiful baby, And they would be this like brutal. It's like, oh no, or they'd take it and just redraw with a really rough pencil like this. So a measure of that is good, I think, for comic artists, especially for people who get into their own personal workflow. And there's a lot more self-taught artists, I believe, now. Maybe not a lot more, but as we're online and sequestered away in our cubby holes digitally, particularly in the last 5 years, I think that people get into their own personal workflows and it can sometimes get a little cramped. So what I'm trying to offer here is a connection back to what I know for sure is the kind of workflow that more experienced people use, and particularly in the past they use, the classical people. Like I know for sure that famous illustrators like Norman Rockwell, or in comics, Noel Sickles, or various people, all kinds of illustrators, Austin Briggs, Bernie Fuchs, there's endless ones. Those are just random ones that came to mind. They're just brilliant people. You'd see these finely printed pieces that look so amazing, but what you don't see, that's the tip of the iceberg. It's the Instagram effect before there was Instagram. The Instagram effect being that you see this beautifully curated, perfect feed of someone. It's not real because you're not seeing all the bad moments, the outtakes when things didn't work. And it was like that even before illustration, in illustration, before digital. You would see in magazines these wonderful covers, maybe like I said, Norman Rockwell, but you didn't always see printed all the iterations he did before, the sketches, the roughs, the various stages, bringing his work up to that final beautiful painting. So if you learn to be like that with your own work and learn to draw it in stages and sort of carefully check it at each stage, then you can really learn how to do quality improvement, product improvement. And that brings to mind one last thing I think too to add to this is be careful who you show your drawings to, because you show it to Aunt Bessie or Uncle Fred or whatever, they're going to probably always say great things. Or even your tribe on the internet, if it's this tribal thing, they may only say good things. Now, it's not like you purposely want to hear bad things, but what you want to hear is things that will improve it. You always want to be looking for things that will be improving your work. And when you're trapped in your own bubble, it can be hard to see because, as I said again, you fall in love with the work. So we have like art goggles, blinders. Like people get conditioned. We get conditioned to our own work, and we kind of don't notice its flaws. And it can come as a shock when someone else points something out. So that again is why I'm preaching or coaching to develop the ability to reverse your outlook on your own work and be a bit, maybe harsher, but not in a mean way, but more objective and analytical. You don't want to be harsh because there's no point to that, because then you fall off the roadway to improvement, or there's a pathway up the mountain, up Art Mountain. You get too negative on yourself and depressed about your work. Oh, I'm no good. I'll never be any good. And it doesn't do anything because it's not action. Action and iterating steps of your work is what will improve you. The other stoppage thing can be the other side you can fall off, is when people get overpraised, or you get gaslit by your tribe that tells you everything you did is perfect and wonderful and better than the other tribe. Well, that's not necessarily true either. So this often happens when you get published and you get commercial success, you get rewarded with lots of money and constant flow of work. What happens is you kind of crystallize into a certain kind of look or workflow, and it can be a little bit deadening. It can stiffen you or narrow you to where you just repeat the same stuff. And if you're already great, well then fine. Who's going to say anything? And if you're happy with it, that's fine too. I'm assuming that anybody who's watched this far, they're probably artists who are looking to improve their work and keep climbing. because that's much more interesting. I mean, who wants to repeat the same drawing for 40 years or the same 10 drawings, you know? Or if you're a guitarist, the same licks, you know, playing the same song over and over, that can be okay for nostalgic purposes. But the challenge is to learn new stuff and find ways to improve it. So what was I saying a minute ago is to not just listen to Aunt Bessie or Uncle Fred or anybody who will just overly flatter you or overly criticize you just meanly. What you want is to find a reliable source of information that comes from a craft or knowledge tradition, accurate information, and wherever that may be. If you can find an external source, that's good. There are all kinds of books. I'll try to remember to put some links to some of those books in the description of this video. But ultimately, as I said at the very beginning, what you're trying to do is develop this within yourself so that it's active in your knowledge and memory as you draw, or you can bring it up and use it as a tool on something you've done. And I've always recommended to people to date your drawings. If you're doing lots of sketches and drawings, put dates on them. It's not for vanity, like you're this big ego head that's like, oh, I did this on this day. It's for a simple practical reason, which is that years later, you want to be able to compare, and it helps make you honest. If you look at your drawing and it's dated, you know, November 30th, 2000, and you go, huh, look at all those mistakes. You can see, oh, I would change that. I would fix this. I'd alter those lines. Well, you know for sure that you've improved because you're seeing more. The whole point is perception. You want to be able to see the mistakes and not be blind to them. And that's the challenge for any human being. So that if you have a date on the drawing, that's going to allow you to establish when you did it, because sometimes it gets foggy. You know, did I do that last year or 10 years ago? So it's kind of another shock or sort of a marker to stop you from lying to yourself, because it can be pretty bracing if you look at a drawing and go, you know, it's just the same as ever. And it's not that great, but it's maybe not that terrible. But it's 10 years go by, and it's not changing to where you want it to be. Because in the end, that's really what matters. If you're not doing that, then you know, I guess that's a problem for you. Like for myself, I always set the goal. I want to just do my best to keep learning and improving, whether it's in drawing or in other stuff. It makes life much more interesting. So there you go. Thank you for listening to this. It's been an hour, and as ever, if you could, if you liked this, like, subscribe, maybe share it on X. You can find me and follow me if you wish on X and all platforms under Rocket Fiction. As you can see on screen there, I've got an Instagram called Art Principles, which is separate. It's kind of like a little area page I made for sharing art information, just like craft information. So if you want to follow over there too, that would be great. And again, so I'm going to end this, but thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.